Hello, everyone. A lot of people have been asking me a lot of questions about Black history, and I just wanted to take a few moments and explain a couple of things that are real meaningful in the Black community. One is why we should not, in my opinion, celebrate July 4th as a holiday, and what Juneteenth is all about. There's a lot of people have been asking me, what is Juneteenth? Okay, a little background in history is that I'm also a teacher, so bear with me for a second. Well, in early 1776, of course, we know that certain people in America were free from British rule. So they were happy because they didn't have to deal with British rule anymore. So on that date, 1776, independence from Britain was called, which made a lot of people happy, and when you get a certain group of people happy, they drink. And when they start drinking, using guns, what happened during that time is 1776, we were still slaves. It was the height of slavery during that time. So they decided to murder, kill, rape as many of us on that date that's chronicled throughout history on that date. More of us had died because they were happy, they were free from Britain, they can do whatever they wanted to do with the colonists. So picnic came as a pick-up, the N-word. They would send us out in the woods and go chase us and shoot us and kill us as the slaves. So when we hear 1776 and bombs going off and all kinds of things being firecrackers, that to me symbolizes a black person being shot in the woods because it was a game, it was a sport for certain white slave owners. That's what it actually means. Everything has context. And that's what 1776, because we were still slaves. For another 100 years, we were slaves. So for the independence, that was not our independence. We were still slaves. Fast forward, 1862. President Lincoln, signed the Emancipation Proclamation to free the slaves, which was, by and part, to end the North fighting the South, because the North was beating the South, and the Union was being destroyed. So they made a compromise. The North will stop fighting the South if the South would agree to give up slavery. That was all what it was about. So it was signed in 1862 by Abraham Lincoln to free the slaves. But fast forward, 2.5 years later, black people in the slave plantations, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, South Carolina, Mississippi, Texas, were still working. For 2.5 years working on plantations, because the slave owners knew that the slaves couldn't read. And how are they going to read a bill which was as long as the Emancipation Proclamation? They couldn't understand it. So they were still slaves on the plantation. So the Union Army in the North decided that in order for the slaves to really be free, we would have to get on horseback and ride into every plantation in the South and physically tell the slave owners they are free. So that's what they did. Physically, Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi. And when they got to the major plantation in Texas, Galveston, Texas, they rode in, called all the slaves together on that plantation and said, you know what? You are free. President signed a piece of paper that made all of you free. And somebody said, when did they sign it? 2.5 years ago. So that was a really sad thing that they were working for 2.5 years when they were supposed to actually been free. But the slave owners weren't going to tell them. So the slaves got together and someone said, you know what? Let's mark this date in history, our independence, 1865 now. Let's mark this date. Okay, Well, what date is it? I don't know. I can't tell time. I can't read. I don't know what date. But we know by planning that it's the middle of the year. So, let's say June. Okay? What day in June? 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th. I don't know. Remember, I can't read. So I can't read the calendar. So let's just sum it up and say Juneteenth as a day, one of those days, since we don't know. Let's just say Juneteenth, which encompasses all of the teenth. So June 19th is the date that we celebrate because of June 20th is not the 10th. So Juneteenth, actually June 19th is the date that we celebrate our independence in this country. Remember, 1776 was a whole 100 years earlier. We were slaves. We were being beaten. We were being raped. We were being murdered. We were being killed on that date because the slave masters were happy that they didn't have to obey the British rule anymore, which said you couldn't kill your slaves. You need to use your slaves as property. They were free. They were happy. So they raped, murdered, killed us, burned us on that date is the most hated date for our ancestors who died on that date. So to mark that date, 1776, July 4th, is to acknowledge murder and genocide of us, so many people. And remember, murder has no statute of limitations. No statute of limitations. Not like robbing a bank. You can wait a couple years, grab someone's purse and run down the block, wait a couple years. They can't charge you. But murder has no statute of limitations. So the people who were witnessing and a party of or with the murder or committed the murder of a slave or a person during that time, they could be still walking around. If it was in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, they could be still walking around on this planet, still with murder in their heart, which never will be charged because of the way the laws are now. So I just wanted to open it up by explaining what my views of July 4th are in context of history. This is history. And what Juneteenth is in history. And one last thing about Juneteenth, which is significant, because I wrote a book about this part and I toured with a play similar to the backgrounds of, because after the slaves in Juneteenth decided that was our date, General Sherman in Charleston decided that, you know what, this is a good idea. Since they've been working 2.5 years for free, let's give them something. So they decided to give all the slaves in Charleston 40 acres of land and 1 mule. They couldn't give them money because they couldn't spend it on the stores because people wouldn't honor their money. So 40 acres of land and a mule, we could plow the mule, be our own sharecroppers, and live our own lives since now we don't have to work for master. So that was a great idea. And then they said, why don't we write it up and send it to Lincoln? Because Lincoln's a nice guy. He signed the Emancipation Proclamation to free the slaves. Maybe he'll sign this other bill into law and give everybody in the South 40 acres of land and 1 mule. From Georgia, South Carolina, and Alabama, North Carolina. All of us. So they wrote it up and had to get on horseback because obviously Charleston and D.C., Washington, D.C. is a long distance. So horseback, started a ride. But somebody got the plan and got in front of the horse that was going to D.C. and got to Lincoln and got to the people around Lincoln and told them, hey, when this horse gets here, Lincoln's going to sign it and going to give everybody our land and don't give them a mule. We can't have this. So Lincoln was giving a speech in the ballroom. Guess what happened to Lincoln? He got assassinated. Whether it was because they didn't like his politics, but we know slave owners didn't want to give up that land in Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, North Carolina, and Mississippi. A lot of land to a bunch of slaves. So he was killed before that paper got to him. Andrew Johnson, vice president, became president. Dead. Vetoed. It was dead on delivery. They weren't going to pick it up. They weren't going to touch it. 40 acres of land and a mule wasn't going to become a reality for the slaves in the South. So I wrote a play. Some of you may have seen it. We toured with it, called 40 Acres, Who Stole the Mule? My play was based on a family finally getting their 40 acres and a mule today. And of course, the family's fighting over the mule, trying to sell the mule, because who wants a mule? And you see how material things can break up a family. So that play we toured was very successful. But it brought up a lot of Black history context to the 40 acres and a mule, which we thought when Obama got in office, we were going to get it. But of course, we had to deal with Congress. It won't become a reality. Not in my lifetime. But 40 acres and a mule is something that we should have been given long time ago because of reparations for slaves. So that's something I just wanted to share with you about July 4th. There's a boycott for July 4th. I personally never celebrated it. But I can't tell you what to do. You have to look inside your own heart and follow the ancestors and do what you feel is necessary. But I hope I've told you something about Juneteenth. So when you hear Juneteenth being celebrated on June 19th, you know more about it. And that's something that we should pass on, because history is his story, but it can be our story if we pass it on to our children and our children's children, so they know what we had to go through to become who we are today. So once again, thank you for allowing me. My name is Michael Jones. If anyone wants to touch base with me, you can check me out on Facebook, Mike Jones, or contact me. My email, blackceo99@yahoo.com. Thank you. Love you.